To serve a higher calling can bring a person great satisfaction and meaning in a life which may otherwise be directionless and flaccid, lacking in motivation beyond their basest needs and desires, flitting from the service of one urge to the next without thought or consequence, living the life of a beast, barely more than an animal. Likely a person without such a calling will stoop to devouring their own flesh, unable to tell friend from foe, always craving, unable to discern what they are eating, a blob carelessly meandering a broken wasteland, their surroundings slowly becoming fused with their flesh, open wounds bleeding bodily fluids and fecal matter out into their environment like geysers of decay. But how does one find a calling? Not everyone is lucky enough to find a cause which they can put their faith in, and which in turn their faith can be returned tenfold, rewarding the faithful with meaning and direction. No, most of us are doomed to be forever stuck in the churn, running on the spinning wheel with no hope of ever finding a glimpse of meaning or understanding. In Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden, our two protagonists have put their faith in one such calling: banishing. It is their calling to travel the land and seek out victims tormented by the memories of the dead and help relieve them of their burden. A banisher's duty is to free these ghosts from that which binds them to the living world. However, a banisher's duty is not to the victim of the haunting, but to bringing balance to the world at large. So a victim of a haunting may come to regret calling on the services of a banisher, for they may find that when the dust has settled and the banisher has come to a judgment, it is the haunted themselves who wind up banished from the world of the living. In succumbing to the service of a higher power, we may also lose that which made us human in the first place. To some, this can come as a welcome relief, but to others, it can be a curse. You must be careful in choosing to serve a greater cause, for you may find that it leads to your destruction or alienation. The Banishers live a life of solitude, shunned by their fellow man out of suspicion and fear, and rightfully so. However, when the dead come to their doorstep, there is only one person they will look to. Banishers Ghosts of New Eden takes place in early colonial New England, when the settlers are first coming to the New World. Amidst the pilgrims and frontier settlers, the land is also haunted, for the area surrounding the colony of New Eden has been cursed. So the map entails traveling the vast wilderness of New England in pre-modern days, the occasional rustic enclave barely more than a shanty town, the only man-made structures you'll find. There are several environments which can be explored in New Eden, including a dense forest, swamp, and a snow-covered mountain. The environments in Banishers are understandably lacking in discernible landmarks, making exploring the environments a somewhat homogeneous experience. It is easy to get lost amidst all the trees and rocks, each of which looks very much like the last. The towns are a welcome relief from the bare wilderness. The towns as well are fairly homogeneous, with little variety in architectural style in the undeveloped townships. However, the inhabitants are interesting, with a large variety in their appearances and era-appropriate attire. Banishers is very much a character-driven game. Each inhabitant of New Eden has a backstory and a mission. Unfortunately, the visuals in the dialogue also leaves a bit to be desired, as the facial animations don't quite match up to the dialogue. The ghosts and undead enemies, another focal point of the game, also lack in the visuals department, which is a bit disappointing, as this is an area where they could have shown a bit of pizzazz. The enemy models are kind of vague looking, lacking defining features, and repeated endlessly. The ghosts themselves are also lacking in discernible features, except when they are fully fleshed characters. Visuals are functional, but lacking in inspiration or creativity. The story is Banisher's focal point. Each inhabitant of New Eden has plenty to tell the player. The game's missions are divided into hauntings and the main story. Beyond these story arcs, the game has a deep lore which the player uncovers throughout playing the game. The overarching story involves the two characters, Red and Antea, Banishers who have come to New Eden at the request of the corpulent Fairfax Haskell. New Eden has been cursed. The land covered in mist and the lives of the inhabitants have become dreamlike. Many settlers unable to recall what day it even is. The land as well is plagued, so that farming is difficult, and mysterious monsters have started prowling the forests, making the settlers afraid to leave their homesteads. After arriving in New Eden, the couple quickly faces the progenitor of the curse, a demon called a Nightmare, who is haunting the entire town. The Nightmare kills Antea and nearly kills Red as well, but Red is saved by a local witch. Antea as well cannot move on from the world of the living, while the Nightmare remains and haunts Red. From this point, it is up to the player whether they want to bring Antea back to life in the name of love, or allow her to move on to the afterlife. If the player wants to bring Antea back to life, they will have to perform a ritual which involves gathering the souls of the living. After Antea's death, the town of New Eden is destroyed and the settlers who lived there fled to various parts of the surrounding area. The player travels between 3 settlements before returning to New Eden: the Dark Woods, the Harrows, and Fort Jericho. In each area, there is a central haunting which causes the player to be plagued. The player must solve the central haunting in each area before taking on the Nightmare. The Nightmare is an angry spirit of a former inhabitant of New Eden, Deborah. Deborah was believed to be a witch by the townspeople and was murdered because of it. There are witches in this game, however, Deborah was not one, and she is pissed that they killed her for it. It is a bit strange that her ghost is so much stronger than all the other regular human ghosts, when she wasn't even an actual witch, but who knows. Each inhabitant of New Eden is also individually haunted by their own ghosts. The Banishers can approach each character and take on their haunting. Hauntings operate like a small Sherlock Holmes-style mystery. The hauntings are the highlight of the game, giving the writers room to showcase a lot more of their humor and the uniqueness of the Banishers' world. One haunting involved a mirror cursed by a demon. Another involved a time-traveling ghost haunting herself from the future. The hauntings range from fairy tales to westerns. There are 23 haunting cases in all. Each haunting also has an accompanying follow-up activity afterward, which are less interesting. In the unsettled and wild lands of pre-colonial New England, resources were scant, and the brave settlers who chose to live there take the law into their own hands. The Banishers as well act as a sort of judge and jury of the living and the dead. It's really up to the player to interpret what the role of a Banisher actually is. At the end of each haunting, the player has 3 options. They can ascend the ghost, banish the ghost, or blame the victim. Is it up to the player to enforce some form of law on the land in the absence of a real legal system? Or is it simply their duty to remove the ghosts, no questions asked? Apparently, they also get to decide if the ghost goes to heaven or hell. If the player wants to revive Antea, they will have to blame most of the victims though, because this is the only way to collect sufficient souls for the ritual. If you blame the victim, you essentially murder them by removing their soul from their living body, which Antea absorbs. Worst ghost hunters ever, if you ask me. But I guess it's all part of the job. I generally tried to only blame the victims if they were truly dangerous to New Eden. I did blame the victim on the time-traveling ghost one. I draw a line at self-hauntings. Some of the ghosts are friendly with their haunting victims. Apparently, a ghost slowly kills their hauntee though, sucking out their life force. It's really not that different from a lot of relationships. There is, however, no option to allow the ghost to remain amongst the living at the end of the haunting. Throughout the game, the player slowly uncovers a significant amount of lore from the various writings left around and from the characters themselves. Aside from Banishers, this world also has witches, demonologists, necromancers, and more. We really only get to know the witches, demonologists, and Banishers in this title. The two main characters have a kind of stoic rapport which is not all that exciting or fun, but has a kind of emotional honesty that some people might be into. Depending on how much of the map the player decides to uncover, the game is fairly evenly divided between story-driven hauntings and combat. The narrative is what really drives the game forward. I enjoyed donning my detective hat, and I would have liked the mysteries to be even a bit more involved. As the game is, the mystery solving is mostly just about telling the player where to go and looking at the right objects. The rest of the mystery takes care of itself. The only real decisions the player makes is what to do with these jokers at the end. Sometimes the player will have to switch to Antea in order to uncover clues hidden by ghost webs, whatever that is. The player will also need to perform various rituals in order to hear echoes of the dead and to summon ghosts. Each haunting has a follow-up activity associated with it. Unfortunately, the activities are not nearly as interesting as the hauntings in most cases. But not all. I don't know who came up with the concept of activities, but they seem to be popping up more often in games. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you call them, they are still just basic fetch quests with minimal additional story to go along with it. The combat is a skill and equipment oriented beat 'em up in the vein of God of War games. There are really very few enemy types which repeat in random areas. The combat is most difficult in the beginning when the player has few skills and equipment, but it gets much easier as the game progresses. The player can switch between Red and Antea during combat. Red is better at fighting the spirits and uses a sword and gun. Antea punches and is better at knocking the spirits out of possessed bodies. If the player can stop a ghost from possessing a body, it speeds up the combat. Later in the game, Antea gains the ability to fuse with Red, Gotenks style, giving her superior sword fighting abilities. I like the combat, especially toward the end when the duo have more abilities and equipment perks to explore. It does get repetitive, as does the exploration. The map is extremely convoluted. It's an open world map, however the areas are connected by paths rather than allowing true open world traversal. The actual paths are like a complex spider web of intertwining paths that all look the same. It becomes very confusing navigating the map. There are areas of interest all over, however they are really not interesting. I ignored most of them. Typically they just have like a chest at the end with some unimportant junk in it, like leather. I was surprised by the clunkiness of the interface. Playing on the PS5, I would think it would be fairly slick, however, it was always laggy, opening up the menu, making it annoying to do so. The map also lags when trying to examine it. Banishers is a unique new IP, blending light horror with pilgrim westerns. The well-developed lore really adds a lot to the overall story, and the hauntings are interesting and fun to dive into. If Antea can be a bit annoying at times. I'd recommend this game to fans of the Sherlock Holmes games, the God of War games, and Red Dead Redemption fans. If you're looking for a pure combat experience, this game might have too much talking for you. If you want a pure story game, this game might have too much combat. If you want a good blend of both, this is a solid game with lots of fun ideas to explore.